collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we talk at length to virtuoso jazz musician and composer and author Gilad Atzmon, who was in Cyprus last week.
Who are the Jews? What is Judaism? And what is Jewishness? And how these three terms relate to each other and to Israel and to Zionism and to the Jewish lobbies that serve Israel and so on and so on.
Gilad, welcome back to Cyprus. You've sold out the concerts you've already done. You're part of the musical furniture of the island now. So what are you doing here this time?
I gave a workshop just now. I gave one concert in Limassol, another one in Paphos. Today we are in Nicosia. I'm playing with pretty incredible band. The level of musicianship in the island is quite astonishing, and I can see that there is a lot of audience for what I'm doing. I didn't bring enough books. It's very clear, I kind of pretty much sold out. It's quite amazing for me to see wherever I go in the world now, people come to meet me, people who are not familiar with my music at all, and they stay for the gig and they become also music lovers, which is very reassuring. It means that we are doing the right things on all fronts.
Despite the fact that in many countries, a lot of your gigs and the people who host them come under a lot of pressure, don't they?
For sure. It's not a secret. There are some intensive attempts by the Jewish and Zionist lobbies to cancel my gigs. I have a gig next week that they try to cancel. It is quite an astonishing thing because they really call venues the campaign against anti-Semitism, and they tell their promoters, who worked with me for 22 years, some of them. You probably don't realize, but next week you host a concert by Gilad Atzmon. The guy is an anti-Semite, and this gig is a neo-Nazi gathering or Holocaust denial conference. And they're laughing because they say, Gilad is playing here for so many years, pretty much 3 times a year, some of the clubs, and we never noticed that you run neo-Nazi gatherings. What are they on about? They really think that they are a bunch of delusional lunatics. And the truth of the matter is that they are a bunch. We have the campaign against anti-Semitism, the Community Security Trust. They are shooting themselves in the foot. They really don't know where to stop.
Okay, but for people who are not familiar with your work, Gilad, we should explain that you for many years have campaigned, in a sense, and you've certainly written plenty of books about, let's say, the philosophy and the thinking behind the Zionist movement. So can you just sort of elaborate for those who haven't heard our previous interviews and aren't familiar?
A lot of people understand that something wrong happens in Palestine, particularly wrong, because in the world in which we live, unfortunately, there are a lot of wrong things happening in many places. But I am punished, or let us be more precise, some people try to punish me because I changed the discourse, and I changed it quite a lot. I realize that people don't really understand what Israel is, what it stands for, what is its core ideology. And I'm not trained as an historian or as a political scientist. I was actually trained as a philosopher. So I'm interested in essentialist questions. when I try to understand something, I try to understand what are the conditions that set an event, a substance, a political ideology, and so on and so on. When I looked into the case of Israel, I realized that Israel defines itself as the Jewish state. As such, the first questions that we have to ask ourselves are, who are the Jews? What is Judaism? And what is Jewishness? And how these three terms relate to each other and to Israel and to Zionism and to the Jewish lobbies that serve Israel and so on and so on. I also realized that Jews is not necessarily the problem. We know quite a few Jews who have nothing to do with Israel. Judaism, I thought then, wasn't necessarily the problem, because we are aware of a few Jewish Orthodox sects that actually oppose Israel and Zionism. My views about it changed along the years, because I found out that those Jewish sects, even when they don't support Israel, they support some problematic projects and settlements around New York, for instance, like Kiryat Yoel, which is the situation in Monroe is not very different from than the situation in Palestine. Thanks God, for the time being, there is no much violence there, but it's an expansionist community. They behave almost like settlers.
That is the bottom line of the problem over the years, isn't it? Because the settlements just carry on being built.
It's not just the settlements, and we are now getting to the core of the issue. So it's not the Jews, the people, and it may not be Judaism, the religion, but it is Jewishness. What is Jewishness? Jewishness, as I define it, and by the way, I didn't invent the terms. It's a Jewish term. In Hebrew, Jewishness is called Yehudiyut. All the terms that I'm referring to are Jewish terms. Jews are Yehudim. Judaism is Yahadut. And Jewishness is Yehudiyut. You know, if there are Israelis listening to you, so they know that I'm telling the truth, or Hebrew speakers. Jewishness is the problem, and what Jewishness is different forms of celebration of Jewish chosenness. The problem with Zionism is not the issue that Jews have the right to self-determine who they are. It's not that they don't have the right to have a state of their own. I think that I don't have a problem with it. The problem with Zionism is that they do it on the expense of someone else. This is the problem with the settlements. But exactly the same problems, the same symptoms appear in every Jewish political institution, or every Jewish political ideology, or every form of Jewish gathering, political gathering. And why? Because Jewishness is always celebration of chosenness. So even the Jewish anti-Zionists celebrate these symptoms of chosenness within the Palestinian solidarity movement. They say, oh, we are in a very special position as Jews. We show that not all Jews are Zionists, and they have a list of arguments that most of them are lame. Some of them are genuine. But even when they are genuine, they've managed to establish a discourse of privilege within the Palestinian solidarity discourse. And as things at the moment, the Palestinian solidarity discourse is shaped by Jewish sensitivities. In practice, what we see is that the discourse of the oppressed is shaped by the sensitivities of the oppressors. And this is pretty disastrous, and this is why I don't believe that Jews operating as Jews within the left, within the Palestinian solidarity, is a very healthy development. I actually think that they operate as controlled opposition.
All right, but we mentioned the settlements, and those are internationally condemned, and yet nobody actually does anything about it. And it's like a creeping triffid. Every year, more are built, more land is taken, and nobody seems to do anything about it.
And I actually don't want to talk about the settlements. It's not because I think that the settlements are a positive development, quite the opposite. Settlements, we are talking really about Jewish setting that in the West Bank in post-67. 67, it was 50 years last year. We are now in 2018. Tel Aviv, Jaffa is 48. Lod, Ramle, these were Haifa, these were mixed and Arabic cities. Mixed, I mean Jewish and Arabs, and initially all of them were Arab cities. So from an historical perspective, there is no big difference between Tel Aviv, Haifa, Lod, Ramle, and Bet El, or any other settlement in the West Bank. Also, I don't want to talk about the West Bank because I think that the situation in Gaza is horrendous. And the situation in Gaza is actually light in comparison of the state of Palestinian refugees in Syria, in Lebanon. I've been in Sarvan Shatila, I've been in En Hilwe, and I can tell you that the situation of the state of Palestinians in Lebanon is frightening, and this is something that must be resolved. For me, the Palestinian issue is still the right of return. When we start to talk about the settlements is when we accept that the problem in Israel is the occupation, and I don't accept it. I think that Israel...
No, but my point was that every creeping settlement puts the solution in terms of a right of return more difficult to achieve.
You may be right, but if the right of return is the return to Jaffa and Haifa and Lod and Ramle and Beersheba, then we better state it in the open and don't let all those side issues and relatively minor issues when we are talking about Palestine as Palestine and Palestinian refugees as a huge problem.
But, sorry Gilad, that's pie in the sky. You know and I know I can't even foresee a situation whereby that right of return, which would in effect mean that half of what is now claimed to be Israel, or more than half, would no longer exist as Israel. It's not going to happen. So don't we have to be pragmatic and look at what could happen, which brings me to the question of Donald Trump and Jerusalem.
You know, I'm very happy with Donald Trump and Jerusalem. Not because I support it, obviously, because for very many years, America has been playing a very awkward game in the region, and the Palestinians accepted it, And they
Would we say they were to some degree complicit in it?
You're allowed to say it. I don't tend to criticize Palestinians. You know, they have Palestinians that this is their job, and the same can be said about the West in general. And then Donald Trump appeared on world stage, and a lot of things are moving in the right direction. Abbas, who was regarded as a particularly weak leader, found the balls to tell Secretary of State Pence, sorry guy, you're not invited. You're persona non grata in Ramallah. He had enough guts to tell the Americans for the first time, we don't see you as a mediator. You are a side in this conflict. So thank you very much, Donald Trump. Thank you, Kushner. Thank you, the entire brigade of Zionist Jews who are handling the Middle East process on behalf of the president and obviously managed to achieve nothing. Now, you asked me to be pragmatic. To start with, I don't want to be pragmatic. I'm not an activist. I'm a philosopher. I'm a thinker. I want to search for ethical arguments, and for me, the right of return is an ethical matter. And why? I grew up in a family that believed in their right to come back to their imaginary promised land. I don't believe in any of it. But considering the fact that this is the way I grew up, once I understood that there was an issue with Palestinian right of return, that there was there still is, Israeli discriminatory law that prevents Palestinians from return to their land.
From doing what actually the Jews themselves did.
Exactly. It was very clear to me that this must change. Now, unlike you, I don't think that Israel will be there for much longer. The Zionist dream that was a very, very exciting dream. Why it was so exciting? It was so exciting because it identified serious problems at the core of Jewish identity. It promised the Jews, my ancestors, half of my ancestors, because the other, were pre-Zionist in Palestine. It promised the Jews to turn them into people like all other people. The Zionist movement, and to a certain extent some people say that, and for a good reason, that it was an anti-Semitic movement, saw the Jews as the diaspora Jews as an uncivilized entity. If you read the early Zionist texts like Nordau and Katzenelson and Ade Borchov, and it'll do a blind test, you would think that it's Hitler who is saying such horrid things about the Jews. This is what we find so exciting. And we young Israelis at the time, I was born 20 years after, less than 20 years after, the second decade after 48, we saw ourselves as a new breed of Jews, people who are recovered. And by the way, we'll talk about it in a second, you can still see that the most interesting voices who criticize the Israeli and Jewish essentiality are Israelis, because there was a deep contempt in us to this Jewish chosenness identity. We thought that we become the new generation of humanist Jews. And you can think about Israel Shachak and Shlomo Zand and Gideon Levy, Uri Avneri, very interesting writers, Israel Shamir. Now, if you want to understand, and on that point, I'm at the moment taking a counter position to the entire universe of anti-Zionist commentators. Most of them, or I would say all of them probably except me, believe that Zionism hijacked Judaism. I argue that it's the other way around. Jewishness, I'm not talking about Judaism yet, Jewishness hijacked the sense of chosenness, hijacked Zionism and destroyed this movement, and the ethical dream of bringing to light to the world a new Jew fell apart. It didn't take long before it was Judaism, or an interpretation of Judaism, and I'm talking particularly about the interpretation of the Rabbi Cook, who was, you spoke about the settlements, he was kind of Eretz Yisrael Shlema, the Jewish state from the Jordan to the sea, and so on and so on. It didn't take long before it was actually Judaism that completed the project and hijacked Judaism. And as we see, Israel, not only that it didn't bring to life a new Jew, this strange country manifests the most problematic symptom of Jewishness. Just look at the wall. The whole idea of Zionism was to break out of the walls, to destroy the ghetto walls, to bond with the land, to love your neighbor and being loved by your neighbor. You look at Israel.
They're inside a wall.
They're inside the wall. They made Israel into a huge ghetto, surrounded by the biggest ghetto wall ever seen on this planet. And this is why I don't think that Israel is going to be there for much longer. It is a new, devastating ghetto. The Israelis are themselves like the Palestinians. When I say we are all Palestinians, I definitely refer to the Brits, who see their freedom of speech annihilated thanks to those Zionist lobbies. I refer to the Americans, who see their country sending young Americans to die for Zion. But I'm also referring to the Israelis, who cannot even afford to buy themselves a roof in their own state, because a third of the flats in Tel Aviv are owned by French and American and British Jews who see Israel as a Holocaust shelter. Now, an intimate question. Do you have a Holocaust shelter yourself? You don't? No, I know that you don't. People don't have Holocaust shelter. What kind of people see the need to buy themselves a Holocaust shelter? People who actually believe that there is a disaster awaiting for them.
But from what you've said, and we have to wrap this up, Gilad, Israel is a disaster waiting to happen.
By the way, I'm not so sure that the end of Israel, I'm not a prophet. I mean, I could be, but I really charge a lot for prophecies. You know, I am not so sure what kind of, how the end of Israel going to look like. Maybe it is already ended. It is not necessarily a violent. You know, it is very possible that, and this is the case. You know, do you know what is the statistics about Israelis living? And actually, I developed an argument in the Wandering Good that came out in 2011, and I'm arguing. So I'm talking about it really for pretty much a decade. There is a counter flow of aspiration Israelis just want to go out.
I was going to ask you whether or not, I know you haven't been to Israel for some time, but you obviously know a lot of people who are there.
Yeah.
Are they happy? Because that surely is possibly the bottom line. If people are not happy in their homeland, then I do wonder whether that is one of the things that precipitates something to change.
This is a very good question. And I don't know when is the last time you spoke with Brits or with Americans. A lot of people are unhappy wherever they are because something quite dramatic happened to us in the last 2-3 decades, and it's connected with what I define as Jerusalem, and we probably don't have time for it, but it's not necessarily Israel. So again, I don't see Israel as the core of the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. To answer your questions, your last question, I think that a few Israelis are happy, and it is understandable. They are living in denial. They are very quick to snooze, to get into this snoozy mode of thinking. But as soon as things start to rattle, and I think that things are slightly shaky, for instance, because of a possible conflict with Lebanon, this is when their mood is changing rapidly. And the facts are that a lot of Israelis trying to move out and dream of moving out, and this is a clear sign that something is not right there.
Well, that is Gilad Atzmon. Look him up online. Gilad, you do actually have your own Facebook page and you've written several books. So where can people find the details if they want to hear more about your thoughts on Israel?
Gilad.co.uk. When you get to this page, look for the magazine and you see my recent ideas and recent news about my music. And also, make sure that you get yourself a copy of Being in Time, my recent book, because this is the book that they are desperate to burn at the moment. If they want to burn it, you want to own it.
Gilad Atzmon, always a pleasure to talk to him. He's been in Cyprus for some gigs and workshops, and doubtless he'll be back again very soon. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.